starting with you and talk a little bit about your character and how you came to this one, and we'll go down.
Cool. How I came to an audition for the role. I was fortunate enough to get it. But what drew me to it was just the concept in general. This is like historical fiction in a sense. That's really cool that there was once a project called Orion that had a lot of parallels to Ascension. But Aaron Dalton in general, I think there's a quote by Raymond Chandler that Phil Evans, we talked about a lot about. It's down these mean streets a man must go who is neither tarnished nor afraid. And Aaron Gold personifies that to the max. He's a reluctant exo of the ship. He doesn't necessarily want to investigate the murder, but it keeps him focused. It keeps him motivated. And so he's a great character, having been born in the lower decks and having made that rare transition to the upper decks. He's a great, interesting character to play with a lot of internal issues going on.
Great. Tricia, welcome back to Syfy.
Thank you. Definitely very happy to be back. Leandra is a complicated character, which you see on the surface, you think is one thing, and a very strong character, and also dealing with some of the sexual, we haven't gone as far as we have now, so contemporary in our world. So I think she's also a woman that sort of feels that she hasn't been able to accomplish what she would necessarily like to accomplish on her own. She stands behind her man, but she's also, as Philip has told me, sort of the steel in his spine. So she definitely works hard to stay in power. She grew up on the lower decks as well as Brandon's character, and has made her way to the upper decks and is determined to stay there and to keep her husband in power.
Hey, Brian.
Yes. I'm Brian Van Holt. I play Captain Denninger, which would never happen in real life. But if it did, Bill, you'd be my first passenger. We're going down.
Glad right on.
That's a new spinoff, all right? It's going to be called Ascension. How did I got a straight offer. Just kidding. How did I get this character? I begged. I met with the creator of the show, Philip Evans, and I'm upset that he's not here because everybody should get a chance to talk to him. He's got an amazing brain. This is his brainchild. One of the main reasons why I wanted to do this is because of him and his intelligence and his ideas and his imagination. I've never been a part of any kind of show like this, nor have I ever played a character like this, and I was very anxious to do so. And I wanted a departure from what I've been doing for the past few years. So Captain Denninger is the captain of this wonderful ship called Ascension, and this is my beautiful wife, who's the real captain, which would be that would be realistic in real life for sure. He's a natural-born leader, and the captain of the ship does a lot of responsibility. He's in charge of, how many passengers do we have now? 600? The whole community. He's in charge and responsible for their well-being and to get to our destination, which is called Proxima. But Captain Denninger is not without his moral ambiguities. He deals with some demons and how he deals with them. His outlets are morally questionable, which made him a very interesting character to play for me, which that would happen in real life. Right? So he's not your normal, he's definitely not Captain Kirk. I don't even know what that means really, but he's a very layered character. What else can I say about Captain?
That's good.
I'm going forever. How much time?
He really can. I was on a plane with him yesterday.
And then,
No, sorry.
I'm Andrea Roth. I play Dr. Julia Price, the doctor on board Ascension. More importantly, I'm a mother struggling with a teenage daughter, and the issues that have been added to that is since we were on the ship and we were born on the ship, and my daughter has no sort of choice in her life or what career path to take, and obviously all of that is very limited. So she and I are sort of struggling, mother-daughter stuff there, and also she finds herself attracted to a lower decker, and aboard our ship. I'm gonna go as long as he is. Sorry.
I'm sorry, you were attracted to the lower decker?
My daughter is aboard the ship. You have to be matched. We don't get to choose who we're with. So I know, possibly from a past experience, that her falling for someone and following that passion can only lead to heartbreak. So I'm trying to protect her.
Yeah, but tell us about the show.
And Al, just a tiny bit about your character.
I'm Al Sapiens. I play the mafia guy in the show. Getting this part, I'm very, very excited about the concept of this show, and that's what drew me to it. It's a parallel society that is not influenced in any way by anything on Earth for 50 years. We don't know that John Kennedy got shot. We don't know about the civil rights movement. We don't know about women's lib. Our input from Earth stopped in 1963. So we're the society on the ship, and I am the political end. And interestingly enough, even though we've had no influence from Earth, the political end evolved the same way as politicians on Earth. I'm self-serving. I put myself instead of the good of the ship, and I'm having a love affair with the captain's wife. So I'm a perfect politician in exact evolution to what happened on Earth. But anyway, that's my character.
Thank you. All right, let me open it up to questions.
I get to be first. Is that on? Okay. Yeah. Sorry, Michael Lehman from Airlock Alpha. When you guys talk about this being a limited series, I mean, are we talking backdoor pilot? Are we talking, that this really is limited? And we're kind of stopping. I mean, I'm making more of the bill.
I'll do this one. It is a 6-hour kickoff. And we have a tradition. This network, Battlestar Galactica, started that way, as Trish knows, and other networks do it. It's concepts this big that require this much world building. Sometimes you can't do in just a 2-hour pilot. You need more answers, and especially this one. And when you guys watch, you'll understand why. So we're gonna air it. We're gonna make a big event out of it, and then we're gonna talk about the future, hopefully, very shortly after that.
Hi, Ken Gold from Media Boulevard. I've got a question for, I guess, whoever wants to answer it. But if you're given an opportunity like this, would you actually go?
Oof. I think I would.
If the women were this good looking.
We created on Ascension 100%. Absolutely.
I might have trouble with it.
Well, your cats.
If I could take my cats, yes.
I've always wanted to go to space. Sorry. Oh, I always wanted to go to space. I mean, who doesn't, in a sense? And I think the mission, the purpose of the mission is super righteous, and we're the leaders of a new frontier to propagate a new planet and carry on humanity. So that's cool. I think I would. Once I'm on it, that would present a whole different number of issues. I don't know if I would regret it, but initially up front, yeah, I think it would be really enticing. It'd be hard to turn down.
I'm with him.
Seeing as how the character's going to have to evolve without outside influences from Earth, what kind of research was needed for your roles?
God, I hate that question.
A lot of long talks with Phil Levins.
By the way, it's true. A lot of conversations with Philip Levins. What kind of research did you guys study the time period?
Yeah, studied the 60s.
Try to feel like the literature at the time, the movies at the time, and try to go back and get a sense of what a wider feeling of that era.
Which conveniently, right after his cast, CNN 60s series, documentary series started. So that was very nice, perfect timing. I can work out on the treadmill and study at the same time.
You know, and it's interesting, for an actor, it's the opposite of what you normally do. For a role, you have to research what you don't know. For this one, you just had to forget what you knew. Like, you have to imagine what it would be like if there were no civil rights, if there was no Martin Luther King, if there was no Malcolm X, if there was no women's lib movement and total equality now in most places in the United States. Like, what would society be like without that? And it's basically Mad Men. You know, so it's Mad Men meets Star Trek meets Lost. You know.
That actually kind of leads into my question, because I wanted to ask about the gender roles on the show. As I guess this is for the ladies. As you play these characters on these shows, do your characters struggle with the fact that there is no women's lib movement?
You know, I think one of the things I found interesting about the show is how, obviously it was the early 60s, but our society has also evolved in some way. So it's not exactly like Mad Men. It's not exactly like going back to 1963 or 1962. Or, it's its own sort of society that has evolved in its own way, but as a society of 600 people, which would evolve much slower. You know, small town as opposed to a big city. And I did find it interesting to play. I quite often play very strong characters. My character is strong, but yet she had to be the one behind and maybe speak up in chambers, our quarters, as opposed to being able to speak up necessarily in public and at the group. I think my character struggles with wanting to have done more, and I think in one way admires the doctor, and I think I say to you at one point, your character, you're lucky you found something meaningful to do on the ship. So I think my character struggles, even though she's in a position of power on the ship, she does struggle with it not being necessarily what she would want to do mentally and emotionally.
And I am the head doctor, so even though it's 50 years have gone on, so that female is that, I am the head doctor, so we have no knowledge of the woman's lib, and I think we just, the naturally stronger woman, tempered by a societal genteelness, I guess. I think it's sort of what starts to happen.
I actually am a little, I don't want to say confused by that, but I just want to ask, do you guys think that even without radical movements to push for equality, that even in a society like yours, it's just a natural instinct to eventually evolve into equality without constraint?
That's a good question.
And then my other question was, is the entire show taking place on the ship?
The entire show taking place on the
If I could just jump to that first one about, in terms, all of a sudden I just lost what I was going to say.
Would it naturally evolve? Equality, rights, that's the question. I think my answer is absolutely. It's the right thing. So hopefully in a human condition anywhere, eventually, it's just my opinion. Yes, of course it would, but there are always those forces that are self-serving and have their own reasons to keep things unfair and their own profits and their own power. So, and that goes on in the ship a little bit too.
But you're right, it does sort of it is naturally evolving, because the younger generations, your daughter, for instance, is kind of fighting feisty and wanting to get further than she necessarily is expected to, and things like that. So, yeah, without a big movement, I think it is evolving.
And I think it's important to remember this is the first generation that's been born on the ship. Some of these characters were very young kids when they were first brought up. So those movements.
None of us.
I'm the only one.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I'm the only one that was alive when we walked on the ship. And another interesting point about the show, and me personally as an actor, I did The Sopranos and House of Cards. I've done some interesting projects. I think the concept here is amazing and the writing's amazing. When President Kennedy picked the smartest people on Earth and the most qualified people to take this journey. It's based loosely on the Orion Project. Well, as you know from yourselves and your friends, you could, get a perfect score on your SATs. Well, half your kids may not be so bright. So this is the second generation. So you don't have the smart, what was that phrase that Kennedy used, the best and the brightest? You don't have them. This is the second generation running a ship. And in a matter of months, we're going to reach the point of no return. We can't go back to Earth. So people are panicking a little. There's a murder that takes place that we've never had a homicide before. Everyone's freaked out by it, and we don't know why. And then answering your question, there's another parallel story. This ship is sponsored in the U.S. There's the government story about whether, that on ground, I don't want to go into it too much because it's a fantastic thing that you'll see as you watch the show. But yes, there's the government, the ground government following this. So as closely as they can. But anyway,
I also wanted to say that we were populated, like my parents were incredibly smart doctors and intellectuals, and so people who actually chose to go on the ship at that time were quite progressive, and especially in their thinking. Therefore, I think their children would have been raised with, they were allowed to sort of give their own values on the ship. I think my mother would have instilled that in me.
Next question.
James Hamilton, Geekstronomy. I'm curious, is there ever going to be any backstory on how the parents were actually picked for this mission? Speaking of picking the best and the brightest.
That you'll get a lot of those answers.
You will get those answers? Okay, and one other question. Is there a limit to how many children are... I mean, is that going to be a plot issue?
You'll definitely get that answer.
Yeah, just like there's genetic pairing and matching, arranged marriages, so to speak, there's also a birthless ceremony. Controlled, the captain and Deondra gave up their right to have children, but there's a birthless ceremony every year, so it depends on how many people have passed away as to how many children can be born. So many couples on the ship will never be able to have the right to have a child.
And there's a constant population that has to be maintained. People have to die in order for people to be born.
It's a self-sustaining ship, so we can only allow a certain number of people at all times on the ship. So we have to monitor the number of population.
It brings up a bunch of interesting questions, and that if this were to really take place, like controlling a society and having it evolve itself. It's Philip's an intelligent guy, the man who wrote this. It's a very interesting concept.
Thank you.
This is kind of a good question, but also a serious question. How is the black guy on the ship? If you already boarded in 1950s or 1950s.
And he runs. He's the XO. He's the second in command.
Yeah, but wouldn't it presumably be like all white people on the ship?
It's a small microcosm of what the U.S. reflects racially. So there's sprinkles here and there, but that is intentional. We are to carry on the fabric of humanity, specifically regarding the United States and what that looks like on Proxima. So everything is very specific, from birth lists, resources, even genetic makeup, and the look of the ship in terms of the people and the ethnicities are very specific to that. So. And
there was a self-created caste system on the ship that didn't come in the beginning. There are things called the lower decks and the upper decks. The executives, the officers, the politicians, they're in the upper decks. The maintenance people are in the lower decks. And depending on where you fall in your aptitude tests, where you're going to work, he came from the lower decks. And he worked himself up to run the ship. And one other point, and this is just my opinion again, in 1963, the smarter people already believed in equal rights. The Northeasterners, the more educated people already thought it was wrong. And I'm not being, political, but I'm saying, you know what I mean? So the smart people in 63, you brought up this point. They were on the ship, so anyway, you know what I mean?
One more question, guys.
I would like to hear from all of you on this, but Al, you mentioned Mad Men versus Star Trek, or meets Star Trek meets Lost. those are basically all big staples on Twitter, on social media. Do you think Ascension is going to lend itself well to sort of a social media conversation, debates, back and forth, and are each of you excited and willing to get engaged in those debates online?
I'll answer first quickly. Absolutely. Can I tell a really quick story? Let me tell you what I saw in the pool here this morning, right? And I'm no judgment on it, none whatsoever. But I saw a woman in this pool in a burqa, completely dressed from head to toe, swimming with her baby. And 10 feet away was like a 50-year-old woman in a bikini with her children. And I was thinking, like, the diversity of mankind. No other animal in the animal kingdom has that diversity. You could get a lion that's a little bit cranky and may bite you one day. But basically, we are the only animal that we're from here to here. You know, we're poets and we build the Verrazano Bridge, and then we're selfish warlords. And so, and we have an opportunity, and I think this show, the concept of the show is brilliant. And I'm just as excited about it as you guys are, and I can't wait to actually see it. The potential here to have these debates are tremendous. And the potential of where the show could go is tremendous. And we're all going to find out, you know, in December exactly how it lands on people. And I'm hoping that, I have high hopes for this. I really hope it lands the way I think it's going to land. But yes, my answer is yes.
Social media is in the water cooler talk, right? And there are so many angles and elements to the show that lead into that, I think. I think it's something that people will want to discuss, will want to see how somebody else feels about it, that type of thing. So I'm all good and looking forward to engaging. I have to bump up on my intellectual skills.
We'll teach you.
Yeah.
We've got people for that.
I feel the show will definitely provoke thought and conversation and debate. And I'm looking forward to it. I have to. I don't tweet with face. I gotta join this tweeter thing everybody's doing. I think the captain of the ship, which would never really happen, needs to tweet about it. But yes, I think it will provoke a lot of conversation, and you know, it's a forward-thinking show, and that's exciting.
I certainly hope so. I think it's extremely socially relevant. The historical fiction aspect is really cool, and I think it definitely has the ability to be one of those shows where people want to talk about the themes that are so relevant within them. There's so many parallels with what's going on currently and what's happened with what's going on the ship. It's you know, if you had the best and the brightest in a room, what would happen? And you had time and resources for them to continue living in that room, what would happen? And I think that's essentially what we all aspire, you know, to see at some point. It's the ideal situation. It tries to be a utopia in a sense, but perfection is always impossible, and so there's tons of surprises, and there's wonderful stories and characters, and I definitely feel strongly in hoping that people connect. I really think that's possible, and it'll definitely create some thought and conversation for sure.
Plus, we got a great looking cast.
Well, thank you guys so much. This is a great panel. This is one of those shows we could have done a whole day on next.